On this week's episode of Transplant Talks, we have a special guest, Dr. Marsh, who is a professor at Georgetown University and an altruism researcher. She's going to be interviewing Dr. Davis about her journey through living liver donation. So it's a very special episode for us, and I'll let Dr. Davis talk more about it.
Well, thank you, Kush. Yeah, so I came across Dr. Marsh when I was basically trying to understand my own motivation for wanting to donate part of my liver. And I think I initially came across her TED Talk about why some people are more altruistic than others. And then I read some of her research and ultimately reached out to her. And she was kind enough to correspond with me and think some things through. And so today I'm going to kind of turn the tables and let Dr. Marsh interview me. And yeah, we'll see how that goes.
I'm looking forward to it.
Thank you.
Well, thank you so much for having me on today. I'm just delighted to get to chat with you. I always enjoy our conversations. I was really very pleased when you first reached out to me and said that some of the things I'd written and some of my research resonated with your own experiences. But I still think there are things I don't fully know about your own donation and sort of how it fits into the bigger puzzle of how we think about human nature and altruism. So thank you so much for answering my questions.
Of course.
What I'm always most interested to hear is sort of the story of the donation, and in the sense of how did you go from being somebody who is not a altruistic living organ donor to somebody who was. So if you can sort of take me back to that moment, if it was a moment, some people it's more of a process, when you decided to donate a part of your liver. So sort of what was happening in that moment, and what were you thinking and what were you feeling?
Sure. So it was, I would say, a moment that turned into a process. So I was in my first year of medical school and we had a hepatology lecture. And I remember learning in the lecture that it was possible that someone living could donate part of their liver and it would grow back. And I heard that and I thought that was incredibly cool. And I thought, I want to do that. And at the time, I actually reached out to the director of transplant or director of liver transplant. And I told him I was interested. And he, oddly enough, took me seriously and set up a meeting with me and kind of explained the process. And this was 20 years ago. So back then, like non-directed donation or altruistic donation wasn't even really a thing. So at the end of our meeting, he said, the next step would be for you to have a psychological evaluation. And I thought, yikes, that's a little scary. This was before, basically, I kind of felt like this was a weird thing I was asking to do. And then I was worried what someone would think if they did an evaluation. And also the reality was, as a medical student, I didn't really have time to donate and recover. It just really wouldn't have been an option. And so, fast forward 20 years, I was doing some of my charting online and I came across one of the articles on the UC Health website about someone who had actually been a double donor. So she had donated part of her liver and also a kidney. And there was a link to fill out the form to become a living donor. And I, without really even thinking, just filled out the form and kind of went from there. And yeah, then a few months later, I was donating part of my liver.
So it sounds like there really was, for you at least, not like a sort of weighing cost and benefits that led to your wanting to donate. You really heard that you could do it and you wanted to do it. And it was an essentially instantaneous reaction. I mean, this is what always I find so fascinating, is that reaction. And, I think one possibility is maybe that there were other similar decisions you'd made in the past that led up to it. Are you a prior bone marrow or stem cell donor or blood donor or anything like that?
Yeah. So leading up to that, I had donated blood regularly and I started donating platelets. I had signed up to be a marrow donor. At one point in college, they found a potential match, but ended up someone else was a better match. So yeah, I'd done those things.
And do you see those things as connected?
Probably. Yeah. Those things were never really, they just seemed like things I should do and I did them. There wasn't really much weighing the cost benefit either.
And do you think there are experiences that have brought you any sort of a positive response that you think has made you more likely to think, something else like this I could do, I'll do it?
Oh, absolutely. Yes. I think I'm someone who feels better when I help people. I think fortunately my brain likes helping people instead of hurting people, and my brain responds to like doing nice things, which I'm grateful for. So yeah.
Well, I mean, that actually leads me to my next question, which is, do you think that anybody or most people in that same moment about hearing about the possibility of donating a liver who had the same information you had would have made the same decision? Like, oh, I can do that. Sure, why not?
I'm pretty sure I'm the only person in my medical school class who reached out and actually met with the director of transplant. So I think the answer would be no. I don't know that I understand why exactly. There aren't more people who hear that and think, oh, I want to do that. But I guess the answer is no, I don't think most people would do.
And what do you think it is about you? I mean, you said that your brain just responds to other people more compassionately. Do you think that is what it pretty much boils down to about what makes you different and why you responded the way you did?
That's a really good question. And that's one of the things I've spent a lot of time thinking about and trying to figure out. I mean, I think that partly it's because I also am a very anxious person. And I've grown up with OCD. So I grew up very, like, I guess, attuned to all the bad stuff in this world that could happen and worried about it. Also, I think hypersensitive to what other people are going through. So, we'd go by a car accident and I would just be stuck, kind of ruminating about what must have happened to the people in the car. So I think I dealt with that early on by figuring out what I could do to kind of alleviate all the badness that I saw. And so actually at a young age, I started working as an EMT. I started volunteering in the nursing home. I started, working as a nurse aide. And I think being able to do things about all the stuff I was anxious about and all the bad stuff that I saw was more, I guess, basically gave me more of a sense of control in this world and less of a sense of helplessness. Like if I could actually do something to help people, then all the badness wasn't quite as painful. That's one aspect. And then I think the other aspect is just that, I mean, I grew up with a mom who basically rescued any and every animal that we would come across. And so we raised things from like deer mice to lizards to snakes to kittens to whatever. And so, I grew up like rescuing things. And I think that kind of translated into like helping humans as well as something that was modeled from a young age.
As helping is just the response that one has to seeing suffering. That sounds like was what you experienced, at least when you were a kid.
Yeah, at least for me, I think. And I guess one other thought I think that played in is I think sometimes when kids grow up with anxiety, parents can fall into like being too accommodating or reassuring. And for better or worse, my parents were not accommodating at all. So they were like, it makes you anxious. I don't care. You're doing it anyway. And so I think I kind of got that push. So like, even though I was anxious about a lot of things, like that didn't make my decision about what I did.
I love that. I mean, I really think that this is a very mistaken idea a lot of people have about compassion, is that compassion means giving somebody what they want in the moment. So if your child is feeling anxiety about going to a party or going to school, the compassionate thing to do is just to give them what they want. But oftentimes that's not helping people. And I think the evidence is really clear that for anxious people, giving them a sense of self-efficacy by, ensuring that they do the thing they're scared of and learn that they can do it is the more compassionate thing in the long run. That's really interesting. So your parents were clearly very wise people before their time.
Right.
Do you have siblings?
I do. I have a sister who's six years younger and a brother who's 2 years younger.
And are either of them the same way that you are in terms of wanting to donate and help people?
Yes, very much so. So I'm closer to my sister, so I know more about her. My brother, actually, when I told him about donation and we talked about it, expressed some interest in a possibly, kidney donation. I don't think it's something he's moved forward with. But my sister, I think my guess is if she wasn't married and had a husband who was very concerned about this idea, and if she had a job that would allow her to do it, I 100% think she would also donate something. She donates platelets regularly, usually every couple of weeks. She's actually disappointed because she got COVID recently, so she's deferred for a while and she can't donate. I mean, her job is the main caretaker at a wolf sanctuary down in southwestern Colorado. So she's similar. She's been to Africa on many different trips, many different countries, doing different sorts of humanitarian work.
Wow. So, and it sounds like your family's way of caring for those around them manifests in a lot of different ways. So how do you feel about all I mean, as we all know, there's a long list of people who are in need of donor kidneys and donor livers, and there's plenty of potential donors out there. What are your feelings about all the people in the world who have the information necessary about the need for donation and who are healthy and yet just choose not to donate? Do you judge them?
No, I lean more towards judging myself, and I don't know why that is, but I think from the very beginning, I'm like, there's something must be wrong with me to want to do this, right? So what is it about me that is abnormal? It hasn't really occurred to me to judge other people. I am curious, especially now that I've thought about it a lot more. I am curious why people have the information and why more people don't do it. And I guess I kind of have mixed thoughts about that. One is like, I think my life experiences growing up are very unique in ways other than I've talked about so far too. And so I do think there are just certain things that came together to make me want to do this. On the other hand, it does feel like and that's partly why we're doing this podcast, that if more people had the information and it was normalized and less stigmatized, then I do think maybe more people would do it. So yeah, mixed feelings. Maybe there's something inherently different about me, but also maybe if more people knew, they would also consider it.
Sometimes I think there's a stereotype that people who will donate a kidney or a part of their liver to a stranger are just not scared of anything, not scared of surgery, not scared of dying. Do you think that you're just less scared of things than other people?
No.
I know the answer.
No, absolutely not. I mean, I grew up, so part of my OCD was health anxiety, and I was terrified of my body. I mean, I think when I was 13, I would like sneak upstairs and I'd grab this big like American Medical Association book, and I'd like memorize symptom flow charts. And, by the time I don't remember what age, I determined I had polycythemia vera, which apparently affects older men, but I thought I had it at 13, and Hodgkin's lymphoma. So no, I was terrified of my body. And I think it is because of my anxiety and fear and how I've responded to it, actually, that has led me to donate an organ and other things I've done in life, not because I'm fearful.
And do you feel like you were nervous about the possible consequences of the surgery and the post-surgery for yourself at all, or were those just not playing into the equation?
No, I was nervous. I mean, and I think in a realistic way, at the time, the surgeon, Dr. Pomfret, told me the risk of death from a right donor hepatectomy was 1 in 200, which is about 0.5%. Now, probably the risk is actually less than that. There's newer data that suggests it's less than that, but that's the information I was given. And so, it's a small number, but it's not an insignificant number. And so, I had to go through the process of, one of the ways my dad was supportive was helping me write a will. So I wrote a will. I didn't have a will yet. I put together a pet trust because I have parrots and dogs. And so I had to do all these things that really made me have to think about death, and in a way that I hadn't before. And so going into surgery, I would say I was very excited, but I was also terrified. I wasn't so much worried about the recovery. Don't know why I wasn't, but it was like, it felt like a big thing, and it did feel like I was taking a risk.
But it sounds like if you were excited, that you were motivated enough by the goal that it was overwhelming any fear that you had. Is that how you felt?
Yes. Like, I don't think there was ever a moment where I questioned whether I wanted to do it. Like, I was certain I wanted to do it, but that didn't mean there wasn't fear as well.
Yeah, there are plenty of things that I wouldn't do that are much less risky than a 1 in 200 chance. Skydiving and things like that. Would you ever skydive, or have you skydived?
I have not skydived. I probably wouldn't skydive just because that sounds terrifying and no purpose for the terrifying. I mean, I think that's the thing, right? There's a purpose behind donating part of my liver. I don't like to be scared just for the sake of being scared.
I hear you. I'm the same way. I also hear a lot of people wonder if people who donate are at least partly motivated by wanting praise and admiration and everybody thinking they're so amazing. And, I have the way I respond to that, but I'd love to hear how you respond to that.
Yeah, not at all. I was more worried what people would think about me and think that I was doing something very strange. I didn't even tell my parents, for one. My sister told them, and my sister came back to me. She said, yeah, they're pretty dismayed. And so I reached out to them. I'm like, yes, I'm doing this. and they came around. I think I was worried that people I work with would just think it was weird, and why would someone choose to do this? I think that's part of the reason it took 20 years for me to actually follow through. I think I'm especially sensitive to what people might think because I do have mental health diagnoses. I have depression, I have OCD. Were people just going to think this was part of my OCD? Were people going to think this was part of a mental illness? So no, I wasn't doing it for praise. In fact, at first it was very hard for me to even talk about it, and I didn't want to talk about it. I think as I've come more to understand what my motivations are, and having had it be such a meaningful experience, now I'm excited to talk about it, and I'm not embarrassed, and I actually care a lot less what people think. But going into it, it was more worry what people would think of me.
And did you get people who said this is a weird thing to want to do? Did you have that response?
Not to my face, no. I mean, I could tell some people were a little bit skeptical, like, what are you doing? I think it was more so like, I also then decided it would be interesting or kind of cool to also donate a kidney. I think at that point I got a little bit more reaction, is like, when are you going to stop giving away organs? Like, what are you doing this for? But the people who expressed some skepticism or concern were actually very receptive to me explaining my rationale. Now, I didn't end up donating a kidney as well, but it did lead to some interesting discussions.
And then it sounds like your close family wasn't super thrilled with the idea of your donating, which I find so interesting because they clearly are also very compassionate people who care about strangers. And so it's interesting that they were not wholeheartedly enthusiastic about your doing this thing for strangers.
I think it's because they were worried about me. They didn't want something bad to happen to me. And I think sometimes my parents are my parents are disconnected from medical things. I think they have a lot of anxiety related to medical stuff. I remember when I was 18, I was a camp counselor at a camp for kids with HIV and AIDS. And my mom was worried. She didn't understand. She thought maybe I'd be at risk for catching HIV or AIDS and didn't want me to go. So, I mean, I think it's driven by concern for me, even maybe if it wasn't necessarily, well, I guess worrying about 0.5% of dying is informed. So yeah, I don't know.
Did anybody try to tell you not to do it? Like, please don't do this?
I don't think so. No.
That's great. I've definitely talked to other donors who have been told. The social worker, one of the kidney donors that I've interviewed, stopped during the middle of the interview and told the donor, this is a crazy thing to want to do, don't you?
Well, and I did have the transplant team initially tell me, no, I couldn't donate a kidney or even be evaluated because I take lithium. And so I actually went through a process of trying to talk them into it and wrote a manuscript and got it published. And then they did evaluate me. And now it turns out there's other reasons, like my post-surgical anatomy, that I'm not a good candidate for donation. But yeah, I mean, they were trying to be protective of me and my health, which I appreciate.
Yeah, no, obviously. I mean, what's interesting is that, they're feeling compassion and concern for you, and you're focusing on the potential recipient. And so, really everybody's just trying to help the people around them.
Right.
I've interviewed a lot of people who have not donated a kidney to a stranger and say they would not under any circumstances. And they give different reasons. For a lot of them, it's being afraid of the surgery or afraid of dying. But for another subset of them, their primary reason is that they're worried that their organ would go to somebody who didn't deserve it, right? That what if it went to a bad person, or what if it went to somebody who is undeserving? Did that occur to you? And sort of how would you respond to something like that?
No, it didn't. I think for me, the act of doing it was separate from whatever the outcome was. I wouldn't even say I imagined who I might want it to go to, or I really had zero idea in my head about what this person might be like, or who I would want them to be like. It was more the act of doing it that was important to me.
And, I've heard other donors talk about, interesting thought experiments where, for example, what if you discovered that your liver had gone to, think of the worst person you can think of. Hitler's always an easy example, long dead, not controversial anymore, I don't think. But, we can think of, still living, more controversial people that, a person really might not want their liver to go to. And how would you feel if you discovered that your liver had gone to somebody that you just can't stand?
Well, I'm a big fan of doing nice things for people you don't like that actually feels empowering. So I'd say if my liver went to someone terrible, so be it. Like else some good would come of that.
Okay, you got to tell me more about that. Tell me more. I love this about doing nice things for people you don't like. Like how else does this manifest? When did you develop this preference?
That's a good question. And I'm not sure, I don't know how to answer that. I mean, I'm thinking of this trip we went on. We were in the Galapagos and we had this guide who was like really obnoxious. He was just like ridiculously obnoxious, like telling us what to do, how to do it. Like we'd walk ahead and he would just like yell at us. And I was so annoyed. And the way I dealt with it at the end is I tipped him $100 because it felt like in tipping him $100 for being an obnoxious person, like it was almost kind of like being a better person, but also being like, you don't have anything over me because like your rudeness and you're obnoxious, like that's your stuff.
So in other words, you can't drag me down to your level.
Right.
I'm still going to be there's nothing you could do that would be so unkind that I would then act unkindly in return.
Right. And some of it is like, I'm a psychiatrist, the whole DBT principle of opposite action, right? So you do the opposite of what you're feeling like doing, which can actually help change the way you're feeling and the way you go about interacting with the world. So, I think there's some grounding in like therapeutic principles as well. But
yeah, that is a really interesting way of thinking about it. Do you have any intuitions about how we could move more people to think this way and to want to give just because, even if the person on the other end is not like deserving, quote unquote, and even if it might be some risk or cost for them?
Well, I kind of have two trains of thought. So there's part of me that thinks that people are just born a certain way, right? Like some people really like alcohol and they're prone to addiction because their brain produces dopamine to alcohol. My brain does not like alcohol. I drink alcohol, I feel tired, I feel sick. So I am not at risk for addiction to alcohol. Caffeine, on the other hand, my brain likes. So I sometimes drink way too much caffeine throughout the day. My brain also likes helping people. So I think when I help people, my brain releases dopamine. And, I think part of that is just the way my brain was made. Unfortunately, I think there are people whose brain releases dopamine in response to hurting people. And that's just the way their brains are made. That said, I do think there are things that can change the way our brains respond. I think of how I grew up and some of the things that maybe encouraged my behavior is that people helped me. And so I think one of the ways we can encourage people to help others is by helping them. I think, especially if you have people who are in painful situations and then you are able to help them, they are more likely to then, at least what I've seen in my practice and people I know, is they are more likely to then respond to others' pain with helping. Not everybody, but some people are. I think if you have people who are in a lot of pain and they don't receive help and they face a lot of rejection, and that it may be harder for them to respond to others with kindness. So one is helping other people. Two, I think, is giving people the opportunity to help others. So, I feel very privileged that I'm in a position where I'm financially secure. I'm a physician, which means naturally some people respect me. I'm in leadership positions. And so in a position where I have the opportunity to help people. A lot of people aren't, a lot of people have less resources. They have less maybe power status. They have less whatever. And so I think people who naturally have less opportunities, if you can give them opportunities that can actually kind of help train their brain. I think a good example would be like prison dog training programs, right? You take someone who's in a terrible situation, who maybe has done something bad, you give them the ability to care for something, and in reciprocation, they get unconditional love, right? That's almost like a perfect situation of taking something bad and turning it into something good. And then I think the third way is just modeling it, right? So I think that people, especially people in leadership positions, if they can model kindness and compassion, and if they also have other traits that people find desirable, I think people, at least I would like to think, that people then might also want to emulate the kindness and compassion characteristics that goes along with, other desired traits.
Absolutely. No, I completely agree on all those fronts. I think the evidence is really clear that helping. Well, behavior is contagious in general. People like to do what they think is the normal thing to do. And we've seen that work out in really great ways when it comes to different kinds of altruism over the year, with I think blood donation being a really compelling example where there was no volunteer blood donor program in the country for many years. People were paid. And then I think it was causing problems in the blood market to only pay people. And then it switched to being an all volunteer process. And then once it became sort of considered a norm, now we see people donating blood in response to national emergencies. It's just a way that people think of if I feel helpless in the response to something terrible that happened. Well, one good thing I can do is go open up my veins so that my blood can be sucked out by a stranger and then, later dumped into the veins of some other stranger that I'll never meet. And that's, objectively, that's kind of a weird thing to do, to just open up your veins, to let one stranger take it out to give it to another stranger. And in fact, that isn't what people do some places in the world. But once it becomes a norm, right, I think it's the barrier is so much lower. And so I completely agree with you that just talking about the different kinds of donations that people are doing behind the scenes all over the place, I think will help normalize it and make it seem like a much more obvious response to more people in the future. One thing you said made me curious that, you said, and I think I tend to agree with you that, you said your brain responds to helping people by releasing dopamine, which is, we know, the hallmark of any behavior that's self-reinforcing, as if you find it, something that causes activation in that system. And some people argue, and I'm sure you've heard this before, that if helping somebody else brings you any kind of pleasure or positive emotion at all, well, that makes it selfish. And so it's a selfish thing to do because you're doing it for your own gratification. How do you respond to that kind of a query?
Well, I think it doesn't matter whether it's selfish or not, right? Like, who cares? Like, it's the outcome, like the function, I don't care if me helping others is selfish. I know it is in some ways. Like, I like feeling good. So I'm just glad my brain has that kind of selfishness rather than other kinds of selfishness, I guess. Yeah. I don't really care if it's selfish.
Yeah, no, I think that makes sense. And I think thinking about it that way creates this weird paradox where we would say the most altruistic person is somebody who gives begrudgingly, somebody who gives, but they don't want to, they don't like it. Right. And that doesn't seem right either. The kindest person is the person who hates helping. And so in my mind, there's a beautiful book called Altruism by Matthew Ricard, who's a Buddhist monk and philosopher and neuroscientist, who, and I'll just paraphrase him because I never remember his exact beautiful phrasing, but he says that taking joy in helping other people is what it means to be altruistic. Like, that is the definition of altruism. And so if you try to strip joy out, well, you're making the very idea of altruism almost impossible, which I think is really lovely. And it reminds me of some of these interesting debates that have arisen on social media, the source of all that is good, about, have you heard of the famous YouTuber, Mr. Beast? He's a really interesting guy. I mean, he's a very strategic YouTuber. He is sort of maniacal. I mean, you might almost even say a little bit obsessive about how to get the most possible hits on YouTube. And he's analyzed everything from like the thumbnail to like how you light the scenes, the YouTube, anyways. And he was known initially for lots of stunts on YouTube that would get enormous amounts of views. And then of course, a lot of money, so I think he like counted to 500,000 or something without stopping, or 100,000 or something like that. I mean, just counted for, I think it was over 24 hours. And it turns out that lots of people tuned in to watch him just count without taking a break. I mean, it's very silly stuff like that. And then he made a huge amount of money, and he started using his money to commit acts of great altruism, which then resulted in a ton more views, which then he used to help more people. So one of them was that he used all the money he'd earned to cure 10,000 people of blindness, I think for cataract surgery, which is really relatively expensive. And he went all around the world, and, the people lined up outside the door to get this cataract surgery they hadn't been able to afford and see for the first time. And it was really interesting how mixed the responses were to what he's doing, and some people said this is exploitative, it's terrible, to use people this way just to make money. And I wonder do you feel the same way about him? Like, it doesn't matter why he does it, or do you think there's something exploitative about them?
Yeah, I guess I would feel the same way, as it doesn't necessarily matter. I mean, I think I'm curious to learn more about him, but yeah, if he's helping people, he's helping people. I guess, there's always downsides as well. You reading or talking about that quote made me think of a quote that I like from Schopenhauer that I think kind of encompasses the way I think about things. One of the things that I'm more aware of now is like my interconnectedness with like the world and people in general after donating. I think the idea that you can take part of your body and give it to someone else and that can sustain life is really kind of fascinating. And so there's this Schopenhauer quote that says, "My own true inner being actually exists in every living creature as truly and immediately as known to my consciousness only in myself. This realization is the ground of that compassion upon which all true, that is to say, unselfish virtue rests, and whose expression is in every good deed." And I think that's interesting because he's calling it unselfish, but you're being compassionate because you're recognizing yourself in others, right? So in some ways, that's also selfish because you're basically helping yourself by helping others.
Yeah, I suppose, and I also think that when somebody's determined to frame a behavior as selfish, they'll figure out a way to do it almost
Right.
no matter what. There's no act of helping that could seem significant enough or costly enough for some people. And as you know, my suspicion is that there are some people who just don't take joy in helping other people. They never do it intrinsically just because. And so they just can't imagine that there are people that do. And that's, I think, a pretty standard form of human blindness to the minds of others that are different from their own. I love that quote. I'm going to come back to you later to get that because I really love it. And it's related to some of the research I'm doing now. But what I really love about it is it relates to this interesting topic we corresponded about earlier, which is the sense of connectedness to the world that I think you have, despite having encountered a lot of, quote, badness in the world. You've really been in some very dangerous situations where you've been really hurt or in danger before. How do you see that fitting in with your sense of wanting to help others, having been in such sticky situations? It's not naivete, I don't think, right?
No, it's not. And I'll say, just to give people some of the sense of what those situations have been, some of them have been my work. I started working as an EMT when I was 15. And so that means from like young adolescence, I was exposed to a lot of death and blood and pain, actually, with a lot of people as they died. As a psychiatrist, I've spent years working in the psychiatric emergency room. And so see a lot of people with not only mental illness, but also people with a lot of sociopathic behaviors. We've interviewed a mass shooter, evaluated him. So definitely seen a lot of badness in my work. I've also, had the experience of someone coming at me in the alley with a gun, trying to rob me. And I've had the experience of being sexually assaulted by a massage therapist in a foreign country. And I think that somehow in all of those situations, I have not felt helpless. And so, my work positions are positions I was choosing. So I didn't feel helpless. I think even when the person came at me in the alley with a gun, I screamed and he paused and he ran off. Don't understand why. But, I was able to scream. I didn't feel helpless. And then, when I was assaulted by the massage therapist, I wrote a letter and ultimately he got fired. And I have been in positions where I felt somewhat helpless. For example, when, I had a good friend who I found unconscious and called an ambulance and they took her to an ER. Well, when I got to the ER, the ambulance wasn't there. And the person at the desk was so callous. They were just like, I don't know where they went. How would I know? And I was so angry. And I think something that maybe is different about me is I think partly because I am compassionate and kind, I expect it too. Like, I feel like I'm deserving of it. So if someone is unkind to me, like that person, I don't tolerate it. I push back and I was vocal until they found someone who could help me. So no, I'm not naive. I think that I have seen enough goodness in this world that I can always find that in abundance compared to the badness. And some of that is just I've been lucky with my life circumstances. And some of that is I think I demand it. Like I don't tolerate people being unkind to me, to other people, to animals. Like that's just not okay.
And what I find so interesting about it, and to confirm, I don't think you're naive, but I can see how that might be one interpretation that a person might have. But what I am amazed at is that you're not cynical. I think a lot of people having gone through those experiences would, become cynical or would become jaded. And, do you think it's just that you focus more on the good and you demand the good that keeps you from becoming cynical?
I mean, I think some of it's just, I'm fortunate. I think even though a lot of those situations were scary, ultimately nothing terrible happened to me. I think if I was in a position where I just was frequently beaten down and I was helpless and I wasn't able to, defend myself, I probably would be more likely to become cynical. But I also think that making the choice to respond with either something that gives me some sort of agency or respond in a way that I guess emphasizes or brings out kindness in others has also helped me not be cynical. And I also I'm just super aware of how fortunate and privileged I am. And I mean, I remind myself of that frequently. Like, I am in a position where I have the opportunity to do things for other people. Like, I'm so fortunate of that.
And I think that makes a lot of sense. And in fact, as you know, I think some of the research we do looks at where in the world people tend to be the most altruistic and especially the most likely to help strangers by donating organs or blood or money or helping animals, et cetera. And it does tend to be places where people are flourishing, where people feel like they have their high level of life satisfaction and feel good about their life. Not necessarily, where they have a ton of money, although obviously having at least some money is better for having a higher quality of life. And I think that's incredibly reassuring to know that when people are generally doing well and feeling good about their lives, they're more likely to help other people, because I think the alternative would be terrible.
Right.
Once people are doing better with their life, they're less likely to help. It would be quite
Right.
a Faustian bargain that I'm glad we don't have to make. That's all the questions I have down. Is there anything else that you wanted to talk about, or anything else, any sort of great pressing myths about liver donors that we haven't touched on?
Well, I think one of the things you had mentioned in your email is whether I have a sense of, I don't remember how you worded it, but it was basically the value in all people, even people you weren't.
Yeah.
Maybe tell me how you were going to ask that.
Yeah. So, one of the questions we've been asking in some of our recent research is, again, like, why is it that people will give to strangers even at a cost to themselves? And there was a theory kicking around that, some people are just better than others at suppressing their selfish urges, that, basically selfish urges are all we have, right? At least they're the strongest ones we have. And some people tamp them down. While the brain imaging research we did most recently suggests that that's not the case, and that altruistic people are helping strangers because they genuinely value the welfare of other people, including total strangers, more than the average person does. And I wondered if that resonates with you.
Yeah, it absolutely does. And in fact, I think it's often easier to help strangers because there's less tied to it, right? So like, I think if I were to help a family member, there's definitely more, again, I don't know if selfish is the right word, but I'm more tied to the outcome, right? Like, it's not just helping for the sake of helping. It's like, I want that person to be in my life. I want that person to like me. I want that person to treat me well. And I also think, like, I'm very sensitive to other people's pain. And if someone's really close to me, sometimes that pain feels unbearable. And I think I can actually sometimes be kind of a difficult person to be in a relationship with, because I have a hard time just sitting with someone else's pain. I want to fix it. I want to make it better. So it is. So all that to say, like, if I don't know someone, like when I donated my liver, like, it was easy to donate my liver to a stranger because I don't care if this person likes me. I hope they have a good outcome, but I'm also not tied to it, right? I don't care what they think about me. It's just more straightforward. And animals too, right? Animals are easier to do things for because they can't push back. I mean, they can, but you can take your dog to the vet, even if it doesn't want to go, right? You can't take a person to the doctor if they don't want to go. So animals and strangers, I'd say those are easier for me to help than like people I'm actually close to and care a lot about.
That's amazing. They're uncomplicated. That's
right.
Certainly true. But it does suggest that you just have a very sort of strong, I don't know, almost sort of crystallized sense of the worth of people who who aren't sitting right there in front of you suffering, who you don't know anything about them. And it's still easy to kind of represent their internal state and think about it as something that matters. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's really lovely. Is there anything you want us to say as a wrap up or anything?
I don't think so. No, I think that was probably good.
What I love about interviewing you is you always anticipate like all the things I've been thinking. Like I was like, yeah, no, that's exactly the thing that I'd been thinking about, and even like what I was going to ask next. It's it's
well, that's good because that means
it's good. Yeah, and well, it makes me feel reassured that I'm not totally out in left field with some of the ideas I'm kicking around. Well, I'll just say, in closing, as always, it's just such a pleasure to talk to you. And I love the fact that you're doing this podcast, doing the show. And I really hope that lots of people hear it and it gives them some good food for thought.
Well, and thank you. I really appreciate you making the time to do this. And it was fun to talk with you about these things.